I'm Russell Beard in America's Pacific Northwest, rewilding the Elwha River.
It's exactly the habitat that they've been missing for 100 years and that they desperately need.
Fish, look at those fish.
Damming rivers to generate hydroelectricity can produce a clean and renewable source of power, but it does so at a significant environmental cost. When you create reservoirs, the organic matter locked up in the soil decomposes and releases methane and CO2 into the atmosphere, while the dam disrupts nutrient and soil cycles, which not only affects the aquatic ecosystems downstream, but has severe impacts on the overall biodiversity. I'm Russell Beard, and I've come to the Olympic National Park in the USA to meet a team of engineers and ecologists who are working on the largest dam removal project in history, healing habitats and setting the Elwha River free. With its headwaters high in the snow-capped mountains of Olympic National Park, the Elwha River runs north through 45 miles of pristine protected forest into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Historically home to all of the migrating salmon species of the region, the once thriving river ecosystem was radically altered with the construction of the Elwha Dam in 1913, followed by the Glines Canyon Dam 14 years later. The dams fueled an economic boom in Port Angeles, but decimated salmon runs from nearly 400,000 fish to less than 3,000 a year. This was a devastating blow for the resident Klallam tribe, for whom the salmon were not just a staple food, but the backbone of their culture and economy. Their protests were ignored for decades until a growing environmental movement gathered political momentum. Finally, in 2011, the dams were decommissioned and demolition began. So, this used to be a reservoir?
Everything below the tree line was underwater.
Wow, it's like someone's just pulled the plug out.
Yeah, well that's, yeah. It wasn't quite like that.
It's taken a specialist team of biologists, geologists and engineers 3 years of blasting to get to this stage. Oh, you kind of get a little bit of the vertigo. You're right up to the edge. Oh, what? Coming in at $325 million, the Elwha ecosystem restoration is the largest project of its kind ever attempted. Huge project.
Huge project. And we knew this is all protected within a national park, so this is pristine wilderness ecosystem. There's no housing developments, there's no industry, there's no irrigation. If the dams came out, they were the only thing that was wrong and the only thing preventing salmon from coming back. And so, but it was very controversial.
Despite fierce opposition, the lower Elwha Klallam tribe have been fighting for the removal of the dams since their construction. And for nearly 40 years, tribal elder Robert Ellefson has been right at the front line. What a lovely atmosphere to this place, isn't it? I saw your flag up there, and I can't help noticing these beasts in the shrubbery.
Yeah, those are actually Chinook salmon, and these are very close to the size that Chinook actually get up to.
No.
Yep, there's a lot of talk historically about 100-pound salmon in the Elwha.
Wow. I mean, 100 pounds.
You can see the tears from the female salmon.
Yeah, I didn't notice that.
There was hardly any spawning area below the dams because of the lack of sediment transport, no sand and gravel coming down. So all they could do is go up, look for the small patches of sand and gravel, or go up to the dam and just sit there looking for ways of going upstream, and since there weren't any, they would just die there.
The salmon were not the only victims. The dams also had a significant knock-on effect at the estuary, another historical fishery for the tribe.
Yeah, these are commercial crab pots. We had a fishery that just ended today. It was 5 days, and I just finished fishing in it.
And would you say that what's happening with the dam, is that going to affect the crab fishing or the biodiversity at the mouth of the river?
Oh yeah, we haven't had any crab at the mouth of the river because they were just large cobbles. But boy, the beach is much, much different. I mean, they've already seen crab moving back into the area.
But there's no chance of getting a crab sculpture outside here. For millennia, the Olympic Mountains have been ground down by ice, wind, and water. In a healthy river system, this weathered rock is transported downstream towards the sea as fine sand and gravel. Fallen trees and woody debris migrating to the coast form snags, slowing the river and forming ecological niches where fish can shelter. As the rocky sediment and organic material settles, it creates habitat for microorganisms and the perfect conditions for salmon to spawn. For over 100 years, this natural flow has been blocked on the Elwha River, and now the dams are gone, an estimated 25 million cubic meters of built-up sediment is finally on the move, and that has to be tracked.
So essentially, I'm measuring the actual elevation of the water. This communicates with about 20 GPS satellites to tell me where this antenna is. We monitor the water surface over time to track how the river is responding to dam removal. So this is a good indicator because that rock is going between being exposed and being submerged. So I know that the top of it is roughly where the average water surface is. And by collecting these profiles, we can show you a picture of how that water surface changed over time.
And you can imagine where these integers would have been. They would have been getting higher and higher and higher and higher, right up to that tree line.
Yep.
Presumably. I mean,
The first surveys were boat surveys.
Yeah.
They're basically the same instrument tied up on a boat, would be way over our heads.
The river has already carried half of its sediment load downstream, uncovering a landscape buried for a century, and the show's only just begun.
The river really hasn't done that amount of work to the sediment that it can reach yet. When we get those first few big storms, I think they're really going to be resetting the valley bottom and setting the stage for development of new floodplains over time.
Is that going to be dangerous? It's fairly, it's fairly soft stuff. If we got a big storm rush through here, that could be taking, presumably a lot of material down.
One of the big reasons that this project was designed to remove the dam in stages was so that a lot of the material that was being washed out could happen with some control over it while the dam was being removed.
Andy's known these mountains since he was a kid, but this rapidly evolving landscape is constantly surprising him.
I feel lucky to be able to see this. I'm trying to pay as much attention as I can to catch it all because, you blink and you miss a big step in the transformation of the river. It's essentially geology and fast forward.
This unprecedented sediment release poses a serious threat to fish, so Andy shares his projections with biologists and engineers so they can regulate the flow and minimize the risk, while still allowing the river to transport the sediment to the coast where it's been sorely missed.
This is great.
Starved of sediment for over a century, this estuary had been steadily eroding, shrinking Clallam territory and eliminating a once thriving ecosystem. Now the sediment is returning, bringing new life to the barren coastline.
You will not see a nearshore restoration like this anywhere else in the world.
112.8.
The Coastal Watershed Institute, skippered by Anne Schaefer, have been monitoring the near shore every month for over a decade before dam removal to record how fish are using it.
It's exactly the habitat that they've been missing for 100 years and that they desperately need. There's well over 70 acres of new estuary in the Elwha nearshore now. Let's go ahead and start.
It's an adventure out here every time.
You look like a bluegrass band. What are you doing down here?
Yeah, hold the cork line up and I'll try to keep the lead line down. Oh, we got mud. Yeah, we'll have to do washing machine.
Do we have fish?
Check them for tags, check them for mark. We're taking the total length on all the fish and we measure the first 20 of each species and then just count the rest. Okay. There you go. Those are a pair of cohos.
Cohos?
Silver salmon, yeah. What we're trying to do is just track the fish use in the estuary in response to dam removal.
Okay.
Coho 7770, coho 7871.
I always hold his nose to the end there. We're going to measure in centimeters from the total length of him.
So that's 55. So we got our coho, 55, and then nose to fork, 51.
Thank you. Go ahead.
You've got a flatfish.
I have a starry flounder.
And it seems like you've got a lot of diversity and a fairly good population in here. Have you seen much of a change since the dam has been removed?
We have seen the change in certain species. We see less staghorn sculpins and more prickly sculpins. And then we also see more steelhead and more bull trout, which were both residents of the upper river.
Okay.
So it appears that there's a lot more connectivity between the upper river and the lower river now.
Okay, is that a good thing?
Yes, it will allow those steelhead to migrate to the ocean and return as larger adults.
A Chinook 9084 unclipped.
Do you see many Chinooks?
At times, yes.
Okay, from our perspective, the Chinook are the most maybe charismatic species, but there are other species that were actually the dominant species in the watershed. And the pink and the chum are the ones that were historically had numbers in the hundreds of thousands and are basically extirpated now. We've gotten large numbers of them in these estuaries earlier in the season, and they're not coming out of the watershed, they're coming along the shoreline. And so they could be the first sentinels of those recovery species.
Sorry, I would come and talk to you, but I think I'm stuck here.
Coho 7375.
Okay, and
7360.
I'm not joking.
keep pulling it straight back. Don't pull it towards Chris. Come straight back.
Look at that! God, you've got your work cut out now, people.
We need a sardine factory.
Hey, Chris, have you and, say, Tara measuring, everybody else just counting and releasing?
I think we've got a hatchery coho release. You'll see this one's marked, showing that it's a hatchery fish.
We'll want to have a conversation about hatchery versus wild and what you're looking at right here, which is a hatchery.
The reason for Anne's awkward expression is that this unexpected catch represents a controversial legal battle.
So that hatchery
I'm
effort
not
is
sure.
intended to augment the natural production during
Yes.
dam removal and to accelerate the restoration of the runs. 8679 marked.
There are two hatcheries on the lower river, one with the state and one with the tribe, and they'll release up to 3 million coho in 24 hours.
One marked coho.
And these coho and chinook are highly predatory, and they will prey on the smaller fish. And so you're releasing these larger hatchery predators right on top of these wild, smaller fish that are trying to come in and use this estuary. It's a direct conflict.
8 unclipped.
9 unclipped.
Four wildfish advocacy groups have filed a court injunction against the tribe and state to decrease the numbers of hatchery releases and allow wild fish to naturally succeed. The natural succession of any ecosystem is a dynamic process defined by competition and domination. Back at the empty reservoir, where a would-be woodland lies in wait of pioneering plant life,
That's one of our planting sites from this year.
another group are sowing the seeds for a healthy habitat.
There's bears in these parts, I've been told.
So we're going to be collecting salmonberry,
Salmon.
appropriately named for the project.
Yeah, right.
They're a native raspberry, so you can try it if you'd like.
Is that okay?
Yeah. My rule of thumb is 2 for the project, 1 for yourself. Perfect.
These salmonberries are just one of 31 native species that Jill and her team of volunteers have identified for collection. They'll be grown to seedlings and hauled out to the old reservoir sites where they're planting more than 400,000 of them.
How are you getting on? I've got 2 so far.
So when you're collecting, it's good to have like a whistle or a call because it's easy to get separated by lots of plants from your buddy. So.
Okay. It's not very loud though, I have to say, Jill.
Well, I don't want to alert all the cougars to where I am.
And these tall grasses, we can just pile through here, is
We
it?
can. Actually, most of these are invasive grasses.
Really?
So,
Okay,
yep.
so just tramp away, really?
Yeah, trample away. We're right next to what is a really invasive species in this area. This is called Herb Robert or Stinky Bob, which if you want to take a sniff of it, you'll understand
This
why. Please pull that out.
Stinky, oh wow,
It smells very bad.
wow.
Some people
I
like
don't
the
think
smell.
it's so
but-
bad. Yeah, I think it's
Well,
quite nice.
maybe because it's closer to where you're native. So.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's the thing with plants is, you know, they're all native somewhere, but here, this really has an impact on our ecosystem.
So what is the real problem? I mean, if this Stinky Bob, he's not from around here, but I mean, everything has changed.
It's true, and these systems are always evolving, so we're not trying to recreate a snapshot in time. But a lot of invasives, they don't have natural checks. So where they come from, they have things that naturally keep them in check, whether it's an insect or other plants. And so they can create these monocultures. And so that can change a whole ecosystem down to the makeup of the soil, or it can affect, you know, like the pollinators or the birds, change the food sources for the local systems. Or it can make soils more erosive, and, you know, those get into the rivers, and it's not as hospitable for salmon. So
Yeah, now when you say that, you know, I'm starting not to like stinky bob after all.
Beautiful things can be dangerous.
Yeah. He gets the bin bag, doesn't he? All right. Is this what you want the banks of the reservoir to look like eventually?
That would be beautiful. Native shrubs and trees and conifers and deciduous grasses. They're going to prevent erosion in the long run so that we have, you know, relatively clear water running through the rivers for the salmon, because that's what this project ultimately is. It's about the salmon and making the river healthy for them.
The safe and speedy return of the salmon is of primary importance to the lower Elwha Clallam tribe, so they've hired fishery expert Mike McHenry to give the fish a fighting chance.
So we're actually going to move this wood into the river channel to slow the channel down, to get it to store and trap gravel and build its bed up, and create pool habitat.
Then how are you actually going to get it?
We have
these into the river
by helicopter.
Basically, we like to utilize root balls on the logs. It's important for the small fish. It gives them places to hide in amongst the roots.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of imagination, does it, to imagine this ideal kind of micro habitat? I mean, that doesn't come cheap, does it? I mean, it's a huge amount of effort here.
It's an expensive process.
As well as expensive engineered log jams, the tribe have invested in kit to monitor juvenile salmon on their way out to sea.
These guys are the progeny of adults that returned to the river last summer. It's pretty exciting because you're seeing naturally produced Chinook that survived in the river despite the high sediment level.
Right. What other obstacles are these guys facing?
Everybody wants to eat them. They got to deal with predatory birds, otters, seals may go after them.
Right, no.
All the marine birds, other fish. They're on everyone's menu and they're high on the list. Northwest tribes have a saying, all things are connected, and you're right. When salmon were abundant, they went to sea small, they came back large, and they brought with them the nutrient burden from the sea. So they come back, spawn, and die. Animals drag them into the brush. Those nutrients are absorbed by the vegetation.
Right.
So the salmon are enhancing the vegetation, which the deer are eating, and probably benefiting from that marine signature.
It's quite a lot of responsibility for such a little fish.
Yeah.
You just chuck them straight in the water here?
Yep. On your ways.
The Clallam are just one of the groups involved in monitoring the Elwha's recovering fish population.
Yeah, this thing uses sound. It's kind of like a flashlight of sound that shines out through the water and just detects fish swimming by.
Using underwater sonar, Keith Denton is recording numbers of adult fish returning from the Pacific in search of spawning grounds.
Some famous fishery scientist says counting fish is like counting trees, except they're invisible and they move. It's pretty difficult to get an accurate number. So that's the far bank right there at about 25 meters. So if a fish swam through here, you would totally pick it up.
Yeah? I'm just crossing my fingers for a giant Chinook to just swim past right now. So why are you doing this?
You know, one of the big questions of why we spent $350 million on dam removal is it going to help the fish population? So we've been doing this for a few years before dam removal, and we have baseline numbers of the number of Chinook in the watershed. And going forward each year, you know, we put another dot on the graph and you get to see where that line starts going. You know, has dam removal increased the number of adult fish returning or not? I mean, a very basic question. How many fish are we getting back?
Yeah. I mean, this is pretty early days, but are you seeing any change so far?
Yeah, I mean, so last year's Chinook season, there was about 4,200 Chinook came back, which was the highest return in 20 years. But all of these fish would have gone out as juveniles before dam removal. So that's more indicative of good ocean conditions than anything going on in this particular watershed dealing with dam removal. Okay. I mean, the life's, you know, the fish are, Chinook are 4 or 5, even 6 years old. So it's going to take 5-10 years at least to sort of get to that point where the fish that are spawning above the dams, children are coming back. All right.
Sonar is pretty good at counting fish, but in order to then determine which species they are, a network of fish biologists from tribe and state must pool their resources.
So that's a bull trout.
This is a bull trout. Species identification is just part of the job. Every fish they catch provides a valuable learning opportunity. Okay, so that was quite amazing, quite gross. What were you doing there?
I was holding the fish.
I didn't do nothing, man. we were doing gastric lavage, which basically you pump water into the fish's stomach and it regurgitates its food.
Okay.
And so just wanted to see what it was eating. Well, these are sub-yearling Chinook released from the hatchery right across over here. There's not a lot of information for what bull trout eat, so we're trying to collect information, see what they're eating. And they just released these hatchery fish the last couple of days, so we haven't seen this type of predation in the 6 weeks that we've been doing this work.
So this is just it's absolute all-you-can-eat buffet at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment it is. So the scale of this is enormous.
So 4 pounds.
We've employed some management practices that are a bit controversial because we were releasing so much sediment. Models all predicted the levels of sediment in the river would be lethal to fish, and that's why we've kind of employed using hatcheries in the near term to basically protect fish from those high turbidity levels. You know, there are risks to hatcheries, but we felt the risk from the hatcheries was less than the risk from the sediment.
Wow, look at that.
They'll tend to just go downstream, and then they'll find a place just to hold, sit there and just figure out like what just happened.
It's going for another run.
Oh, what?
Oh my goodness, you got a monster in there.
That's a Chinook salmon, yes.
Right. And that's like the king, isn't it? Is that
That's
not
the king of the river, yeah.
the king of the river? It only just fits in your box. For now, most returning Chinook and other salmon will be adult hatchery fish. But for the success of the project, all hopes are pinned on them.
So this is a radio tag that we attached, and we're able to manually track these fish. We know where they're moving up and down the river.
By keeping close track of the fish, the team will soon see if returning salmon can get above the old dam sites on their own.
We'd rather see natural colonization with these fish getting up and spawning without any assistance from, humans.
Having now gained over 70 miles of new river habitat, the mighty Chinook is finally free again to rule the Elwha. If they can finally spawn above the dams, it will mark the beginning of a natural life cycle gone for a century that will benefit the entire biosphere and be the crowning achievement for this community of scientists.
This is where all the tribal members come down to check on the river.
How's it looking?
Oh, it looks great. It's looking the way it should look now. Got to remember, it has a great historic meaning to us too because our creation site is on it. The story is that the creator scooped material for creating people out from under the Elwha River and then created people from that.
All we've been talking about here is about the sediment and the sand and the physicality of the river and how that relates to not just the salmon but to the wider biodiversity, and there it is in your creation story as well.
You see the river changing, you see the braiding, you see the woody debris, you see the sand and gravel, and you just feel that that's the way things should be, and it just brings a smile to your face. It's the way things should be.
Spirulina doesn't need farmland to grow on. I wanted to be able to grow our spirulina on unusable or unused spaces.
It's great. It's really good.
It doesn't actually smell at all, and it's just, you just want to kind of play with it.